Welcome to the Comic Sauce Podcast, where we talk comics and comics culture. I am Henry Liu, and today I'm joined by Porfirio Rangel. Porfirio, how goes?
Going good, Henry. Happy to be here chatting with you guys.
Awesome. I'm also joined by Christian Diadamo. Christian, how's it going?
Hey, it goes well. Also happy to be here.
Excellent. Today is Thursday, June 6th, 2024. And last time we talked some X-Men 97, and next month we have Wolverine and Deadpool to look forward to. So we figured, why not keep the mutant vibes going with some more X-Men talk? We're going to talk all about the Fox live action X-Men movies. That is our topic today. And yeah, looking back at this period of superhero movies, it was definitely a significant era, a 20-year period. The first X-Men movie came out in the year 2000, and this particular era ended with the New Mutants in 2020. So 20 years of Fox live action X-Men. Now, X-Men on screen will obviously continue on. We just mentioned Wolverine and Deadpool. And the MCU obviously has grand plans for our mutant friends. But this era is officially over, right? Because Fox was acquired by Disney. So the Fox live action X-Men movies are over. So we can kind of look back and reminisce and just kind of talk things through today. Yeah. So I guess we should give the spoiler alert. A lot of these movies are pretty old now, so um, they're probably fair game. But just in case folks haven't watched some of these movies, we'll give the spoiler alert on all of these. So potentially we'll give away plot spoilers for these X-Men movies. Did you have something, Porfirio?
No. Sorry, just stretching.
All right, cool.
Getting ready to talk.
Yeah, right
Right?
on.
No, I'm ready though. I'm ready to start talking.
Getting ready for the
Awesome.
hot takes, I see. Stretching for
So this is a pretty long list. There's 13 movies that came out during this period, and we're including all of them. Like, yeah, a question might be, what are these movies, right? So basically, any of the Fox movies that have mutants in them, we're including. So that includes Deadpool, Deadpool 2, R-rated movies like Logan, New Mutants, yes, is considered an X-Men movie. Um, so we're including all of those. It's a long list, so we're not going to go in depth on every single movie. Um, I know Porfirio, you did a marathon and you actually watched all these movies.
I did.
Uh,
Yeah.
well done, well done. But we're just going to focus on essentially three. We each had some homework. Porfirio had the first X-Men movie. I had X-Men First Class, and Christian had X-Men Days of Future Past. So we'll focus on those three, but we can definitely like talk through the others, and maybe we'll do a little ranking at the end also. Yeah, so we'll kind of have a free form discussion, and we'll just talk all things X-Men live action. But yeah, why don't we start uh with the first one chronologically, right? X-Men. So this was your pick, Porfirio. I'll
Mhm.
give the little IMDb plot synopsis here. Um, in a world where mutants, evolved superpowered humans, exist and are discriminated against, two groups form for an inevitable clash: the supremacist Brotherhood and the pacifist X-Men. All right, Porfirio, tell us a little bit about this movie.
That's a great description, of the movie. So yeah, this was the first X-Men film that came out in 2000, directed by Bryan Singer, and he directed four or yeah, 4 other X-Men movies. But this was the first, and I feel like this was like not just the start of the X-Men franchise, but kind of like the start of like the superhero genre that kind of kicked off in the early 2000s, you know? And if you listen to the other recording that we did with X-Men 97, like X-Men the animated series was a show I grew up in the 90s. It's a like show I hold really dear to my heart. And so when I saw like that they were gonna make an X-Men film, like live action, I just thought that was pretty cool. How old was I? I was 6 years old at the time. I thought it was pretty cool. And let's see, it was not what I expected, you know. We went from like colorful blue and yellow spandex to an all black leather outfits, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Rogue
Yep. Yep.
Rogue went from like Miss Marvel powers to kind of like an emo teenager. Like there was obviously because it's a live action production, a lot less X-Men characters, you know. It's like, oh, where's Beast? Where's um Gambit, you know, where are all these characters, you know, and so I'll just say at that time, at my 6 year old self, I didn't like the movie.
Makes sense.
Um, yeah, over the years, I guess I've grown to love it and appreciate it, and yeah, so this was the film I decided to go back and rewatch because again, this was like the kickoff to a franchise, you know, and a little like reminder to that little nerdy self that I went as a 6 year old kid.
Right on. Yeah, I'm glad you picked this one because this one has some historical significance, right? Um, One could argue that if it were not for this movie, the first X-Men movie in 2000, and its success, that there might not have been an MCU, right? It's a bit of a stretch, bit of an argument, but one could argue that because a lot of people do point to Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man as being like the gateway to Marvel
Mhm.
Studios, right? So, you know, on that point alone, on that hypothetical alone, uh, this movie does have a lot of significance. Speaking of Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige himself worked on this movie. He was an associate producer, and we all read the MCU book, and yeah, like we now know that um, this movie was kind of his early delving into superhero movies and Marvel fandom and all that kind of thing, right? And I think even as early as this movie, he was already sort of thinking outside the box, thinking from like a fan perspective rather than a movie executive perspective, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about the historical significance of this movie. Any thoughts on this first X-Men movie, Christian?
See, this one I haven't seen in a while. I think I do remember when it came out. It was like a really big movie when it came out in about 2000. Uh, I was never much into X-Men growing up. I never really watched X-Men like bit here and there of the 90s cartoon, and that's about it. So I honestly didn't see this until it uh like came to DVD, which was also very new in the early 2000s. Picking it up from a good old Blockbuster. Oh yeah, there's a little nostalgia there.
What's a blockbuster, Brett? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'm not this that young.
Yeah, back in our day. We
Right.
didn't have those old streaming services. We had to go to the Blockbuster ourselves, and sometimes the movie wouldn't even be there.
Those are fun
Uh,
times.
I know,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
A lot of good memories there. The big one, I think I was really into the Spider-Man movie, the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, though, when that came out. I was so excited to see it. So I saw that in theaters, and I think I saw this, like, a little after. And I th I remember liking it at the time, first time I saw it. I saw it again a little, a ways later, and I think this is, like, a really solid start to the X-Men. I never loved the movie, but I do think credit where credit is due. It's like it it took the comic book seriously. It wasn't super corny like I think the movie that pretty much killed the superhero franchise or the super like subgenre, whatever you want to call it, Batman and Robin,
Mhm,
which went way too far into the camp factor, and then this and Blade. Uh, Spider-Man had some camp, but X-Men and Blade definitely were. It felt like a response to it. Like, okay, well, we're gonna tone down the cheese. We'll have the characters, but it's gonna be serious. We're not gonna have goofy costumes. It's not gonna be bright. They're gonna be in black. Probably
mhm,
also because The Matrix was really popular around then, which also featured a lot of black leather. So that was definitely that it definitely had a lot of that early 2000s style.
mhm.
Yep.
And so there's something so super early 2000s about the movie, you know, I think for better or for worse at the time, but it does deserve its place in comic book history.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that because like you said, like it's really. I mean, I don't know who the target audience was at the time, because I feel like the film was kind of really hot off like the animated series, But I mean, X-Men obviously existed way before that, but it just had a really kind of darker tone. Um, and with a little bit more mature themes. I think I read like an interview that like the director Bryan Singer, he wasn't familiar with the X-Men characters, but he was able to relate to them as a gay man about like being a misfit and all that kind of stuff, which was um very evident in this film. Like you see characters like Rogue and Logan and um that whole like they don't like us kind of thing that Minito's going on about. Like it's a very like in your face kind of theme of like, oh, we're outsiders, we don't know where we belong.
Right on. Yeah, a little bit more on what you mentioned, Christian, the black leather suits. Um, yeah, nowadays a lot of people make fun of those suits, right? And it's kind of a joke, but it's good the context you set out, you laid out because um this movie did come just after the first Blade movie, which was a big success. It came out just after the first Matrix movie, which was also a big success. And also it came out not long after Batman and Robin, which was like a huge failure, right? So it's almost like how could the X-Men not be wearing black leather suits, right? It was a no-brainer in the year 2000. It was just like the thing to do, right? Uh, yeah, like now, 24 years later, it does seem kind of silly, but there was a thing, at the time, that Spider-Man 1 had not come out yet, right? And there was a fear. Movies were afraid of doing superhero movies. Batman and Robin was such a joke, right? So there's a bit of a risk here, and like the safer play was to put the X-Men in black leather suits, right? So it's kind of fun, I think. It's kind of a time capsule, right? It's a sign of the times. And speaking in Sign of the Times, I'm curious, Porfirio, you just watched this movie recently, and
Mhm,
this movie is 24 years old now, which is crazy because I do remember seeing it when it first came out, and it felt very like fresh and new, right? But here
mhm.
we are, decades later. Um, I'm sure it felt dated, but
Mhm.
how dated is this movie? Like, what were your thoughts as you were watching this just recently?
Like I talk about like, oh, this is like the first like what kicked off the X-Men franchise, and I say all that stuff. It is, yeah, like a little bit dated, like the powers and the fighting scenes, the over-the-top choreography. It's just like really, you know? Um, but then yeah, there are just some other things where like I quite in question like Haley Berry as Storm, or the actress who they got for Jean Grey, or the actor who they got for Cyclops. So I'm like, really? Like you just got like big names to fill these roles, you know? Like they didn't feel like those characters, you know? I feel like nowadays the superhero genre tries to do better at like hiring not just a big A-list name, but someone who like can relate to the character or be able to play it well, you know? But it is very dated, but it's still it like for all of us, I feel like just kind of we can't fault it, and it just holds a special place in our hearts for for kicking off this the superhero genre of the early 2000s, you know.
Yeah. Yep. Hey, that is a good point where before with superhero movies, often the casting was like the hot actor of the time, right? Now, it should be noted that the casting of Hugh Jackman was not in this category, right? He was an
Mm-mm,
unknown and he was like kind of a risk, right? But it turned out to be brilliant. So that's something else we can mention with this movie. It brought Hugh Jackman as Wolverine to the world, right? And that's significant because he continued to play Wolverine for many years, and he's gonna play him again
mm-hmm,
next month in the new Deadpool movie, right? So a huge legacy started here, right?
mm-hmm,
But yeah, for the most part, it was like, the popular actor of the day, Halle Berry, you mentioned. She was very popular at the time. Famke Janssen as Jean Grey, she was like the Bond girl.
mm-hmm,
Um, Ray Park, aka Darth Maul, was Toad. Um, you know, Rebecca Romaine was Mystique. Like a lot of these just like kind of popular actors at the time were getting cast. And that did change. I think like um, Tobey Maguire getting cast as Spider-Man was like part of that shift, right? So someone who wasn't like a household name. And
mm-hmm,
then like with the MCU, we saw a lot of these like lesser known actors getting these huge roles, right? So uh yeah, it's interesting to look back at like, oh, how casting was sort of done a little different back then,
mm-hmm.
right? All right. So let's move on. Um, I think at the end we can do like a full ranking, but let's stick with our three for now. So let's cut to 11 years later. X-Men First Class, 2011. This was my pick, so I watched this recently. So, um, timeline wise, where was the X-Men franchise at? So, the X-Men, as we knew them in the movie you watched, Porfirio, X-Men, was was kind of falling out of favor a bit, right? They had their trilogy, X-Men, X2, X-Men: The Last Stand, but X-Men: The Last Stand was really not received all that well, and I think X-Men First Class was intended to pumped some new life into the X-Men franchise, right? It was kind of a prequel. It brought on like a whole new cast of mutants, right? So what do I have to say about this one? Well, I'll first start off by saying the reason I picked this movie is it definitely is one of my favorite live action X-Men movies. And I remember when I first saw it, I really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's always held like kind of a special place in my heart. I hadn't seen it in a while though, so I was curious about how well it would hold up. So let's get into it a bit here. First off, the plot synopsis from IMDb. In the 1960s, superpowered humans, Charles Xavier and Eric Lenscher, worked together to find others like them. But Eric's vengeful pursuit of an ambitious mutant who ruined his life causes a schism to divide them. Okay, so I just asked you about like, oh, was how dated was the first X-Men movie? Um, we'll kind of stick with that a bit here. Um, how dated is this movie? Like, this is another movie that, like, when I first saw it, I felt like, wow, this is kind of a cool, fresh take on the X-Men and just superheroes in general. You know, it's kind of a breath of fresh air in a way. But even this movie's kind of old now. It's 13 years old now, and I would say yes, there are definitely some dated aspects to it. A little disappointed in some ways. I still enjoyed the movie a lot when I watched it this week, but didn't hold up as well as I was hoping it would. I felt like overall the action was, I don't know, I didn't get as hyped about the action as I did before. Um, and let's see, I made a few call outs here. Oh, here's one. We were just talking about like the hot popular actor of the time getting cast. So it should be noted that January Jones was cast as Emma Frost in this movie, and she was like hot off the heels of Mad Men, where she was getting a lot of acclaim. But this is definitely one of those like, okay, popular actor of the time getting a superhero role. She is painfully bad in this movie. Uh, like, I love Mad Men, and she's really awesome in that show. But she's just terrible in this movie. Her line delivery is just, I don't know, she just mailed it in. Just it's almost like uh she was just monotone, no feeling, just bad. So that stood out to me for sure. Um, what else? Uh, the cast in general is really great in this movie. A lot of cool names. James McAvoy as Professor X, Michael Fassbender as Magneto. We got Nicholas Hoult as Beast. Um, oh, and yeah, I wanted to mention Nicholas Hoult. I do like Nicholas Hoult a lot as an actor also. I think we talked about previously how he was really close to getting the Bruce Wayne role in The Batman, right? And just narrowly getting edged out by Robert Pattinson. But I like him a lot as an actor. And I thought he was pretty good in this movie, but we should talk about when he becomes Beast in this movie. So like I think we were talking off mic about how the Beast character in the comics started out looking like a regular dude, but he just had like big feet, right? And then later he became like the blue-haired Beast we all know, right? So that actually kind of happened in this movie. He starts off as like a regular looking guy, but he just has like these big feet. But then at the end of the movie, he does become like the furry blue guy. And the furry blue guy looks to me really terrible. Like He's kind of like he almost looks like a stuffed animal. He's like kind of cuddly, kind of a cuddly blue fur monster. I don't know what it is, but I just thought it looked really bad. I didn't really think so much that previously, but upon watching it again, like wow, it does stand out. It looks pretty terrible. So that wasn't great. And I mentioned the action is like nothing to write home about. Um, with one exception. So I'll get to the positives now. Like, at the end of the movie, basically, it's like the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? And there's a moment where like the US military and the Russian military are at like on the verge of World War III, right? Um, but the crisis is averted, but they decide that even after the crisis is averted, that they're gonna wipe out the mutants, right? So they fire all their missiles at the X-Men. But wait a minute, Magneto is part of that mutant group, right? And he freezes the missiles in midair. And to this day, I think that moment is like really awesome. It looks cool, and it's kind of like the perfect Magneto moment. I think it's the best Magneto moment in these X-Men movies. Really awesome. And speaking of Magneto, I mentioned Michael Fassbender plays him. I think Michael Fassbender and James McAvoy are really awesome in this movie, and they make the movie. Like the dynamic between the two is so spot on. We've talked about the Professor X and Magneto dynamic previously, right? And that conflict between these two characters is really like the heart and soul of the X-Men, right? It's kind of what it's all about. And these two actors, I think, really captured that beautifully in this movie. You really care about their motivations. Both of them have differing points of view, but you understand why they do what they do. And yeah, it's this cool brotherhood that is like very conflictive, but it's like their family at the same time, right? So really kudos to those actors. Did a really great job. And what else? Yeah, it kind of an interesting movie in that it doesn't feel like a superhero movie that much. It feels a little more like this retro 60s spy espionage thriller. So Matthew Vaughn, who is the director, clearly has like a thing for espionage, right? He did the Kingsman movies. He did Argyle more recently. He's got a thing for spy stuff, right? And it really showed with this movie because it really has that spy espionage aspect to it, right? And yeah, I I dig that vibe. You know, upon rewatching it, I think that that feel still works well to this day. Um, we talked about suits, right? The black leather suits in the first X-Men movie. There are X-Men suits in this movie. They are yellow and blue flight suits, right? So I'm kind of curious about your guys' take on these, but I thought they were pretty cool. Like they look cool. They're kind of they're like an homage to the comics, right? They're yellow and blue, but they still work within the realm of this movie, right? Basically, they wear them on their mission at the end of the movie, and the mission does involve getting on the X jet. So having flight suits is like it makes sense. It's logical for the plot of the movie, right? So I thought it worked on a number of levels there. And last little thing I wanted to mention: Hugh Jackman is in this movie. He makes a cameo, and this cameo, I gotta say, is one of the greatest cameos of all time, and one of the greatest F-bombs of all time, right? I almost forgot this was in the movie, so it was kind of this nice treat I got watching it this week. But basically, there's a montage scene where Charles and Eric are recruiting X-Men. They fire up Cerebro for the first time, and they just go out looking for mutants to join the team. And they do find a number of them, and they find Wolverine. They go to a bar, and um there's Hugh Jackman, right? And it's so awesome. Basically, Logan tells them to fuck off. It's so good. Great moment. Yeah, I can't think of a better cameo than that one. I got a huge laugh from that when I first watched it, and I laughed just as hard when I saw it again recently. So, huge props to that cameo. I don't want to go on and on, but yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about what I brought up about the suits. What do we think about the X-Men First Class suits here? It's kind of a response to the black leather suits, right? It's sort of a nod to X-Men comics costumes, but I don't know. What do you guys think about those suits?
I like the suits. Like I thought they looked pretty cool, and yeah, I think you're right that they really fit the tone of the movie with the flight jacket look. And I think it's definitely something that I think a lot of people were kind of waiting for, something, especially with a reboot, like, oh yeah, let's see if they can get a little closer to the comics. Oh, I would like to see. Now they're going to reboot, and I think this is, it was 2011, so I think Avengers was 2012.
Hmm.
So it was, but the MCU had gotten started, so uh, you get this like Iron Man and this Cap and these characters that look just like their comic counterparts, and I think a lot of people were really looking for that with X-Men. And so I think
Hmm.
they did a pretty good job with it.
Right on. Any thoughts on X-Men First Class, Porfirio?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a cool little like reboot of the universe, like after the failure of X-Men 3. I thought it was cool to, jump back into the X-Men characters because, it came out like what, 2011?
Yep.
First Class, like,
Hmm.
this is the time when like superhero films are getting a little bit more of a spotlight within the MCU. Avengers is going to come out the following year, so people are kind of looking at this genre again, with a little bit more eyes on it. There's like The Dark Knight came out, and so um yeah, I thought it was a fun little reintroduction into it.
Cool.
Yeah. Uh, there's another Magneto moment actually I want to bring up that I always thought was I think my personal favorite Magneto moment in the movie. It was when he kills the guy with the coin.
Mm,
He kills
Mm,
Kevin Bacon at the end.
yeah,
mhm.
that was
And I
cool.
think it was right also I think Professor X was like inhabiting Kevin Bacon's mind or something like that.
Right, so he
And
could
he's like
feel the death.
yeah, he feels his death. And Professor X really doesn't want him to kill him and like, oh man, it's such a cathartic moment. Because it's kind of when you're also kind of rooting for Magneto.
Yep.
I'm like, man, all right, this guy's onto something. Fuck Kevin Bacon, kill him, kill him. And
Yeah,
I know this movie does really like bring you over to his side a bit,
yeah.
Mhm.
because you feel
Would
his pain. You see him as a kid in the concentration camps, and like you really like get inside, his head, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So,
w- there's actually, I feel like, it's so funny you bring that up, Christian, because I feel like there's a big reason for that. So
mhm.
like, after I rewatched like every film, I kind of like went into like I took like a rabbit hole down the internet to figure out like why certain characters were used, how they came up with certain storylines, yada yada yada. And so, X-Men Origins Wolverine came out a few years before First Class. And so with the success of the original three X-Men franchises, there were plans for Fox to actually make like two spin-off superhero movies. There was Wolverine and Magneto, and with the popularity of Wolverine, they kind of like went all in on that one. And then with Magneto, they were still playing with the idea of like, we don't know if we want to do it or not. And so then that's when they kind of thought of like First Class. They were like, well, we have an idea of to create like a Magneto origins movie, but we don't know if there's enough faith that he could carry a movie on his own. And so then they were like, well, what if we just like, kind of have a reboot of the characters and add all this like original Magneto storyline going on. And then like you said, like you can't help but root for the guy because there was a lot of emphasis on him, and a lot of that emphasis came from like the early drafts of it being an origin Magneto movie.
Ah, yeah, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can.
solid point.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, yeah, I can really see how this could have started as a Magneto movie.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally forgot that they were planning on doing like a whole series of X-Men origin movies, right?
Hmm.
And Magneto was named, right? It,
Hmm.
it turns out they only did the Wolverine movie and that was it.
Yeah.
But I remember specifically there was supposed to be a Magneto movie, and I can see what you're saying that this kind of became that movie, and like, and maybe why I felt like this was maybe Magneto's movie more than any other character, even Professor X, right? He
Hmm.
he, he did feel like the central character. And the moment you mentioned Christian, I agree, it's awesome because it really brings full circle the moment from earlier in the movie where he's a kid and the Kevin Bacon character torments him, right? And it's this kind of nice payback moment. Definitely very cool. We're talking Magneto here, so one last little nugget. Um, I kind of get a feeling that maybe there's some studio pressure to put Fassbender in a Magneto costume because throughout the movie, he doesn't look like the Magneto we know, right? He's just wearing normal clothes, or he's in like the yellow and blue jumpsuit. Um, he does have the that Magneto helmet a little later after Kevin Bacon is killed. Um, but we don't see like the purple suit, right? Until the end. And this was kind of wedged in there, it felt, where it was like I I get a feeling the studios were like, well, we gotta have Magneto in the suit, at least at the end, right? And I don't know. I thought it looked pretty corny. It looked like a bad cosplay to me. Like, I don't know, it's kind of like silky and just didn't look right. I don't know. But yeah, I don't know, kind of thrown together. Seems like they did better in the Magneto costuming in subsequent movies, but yeah. What was supposed to be this like cool fan moment at the end, I felt kind of felt flat because the costume looked pretty bad.
Maybe that's why they went with the black leather original
Maybe
for all the costumes. They're like, oh no,
right,
we can't
yeah,
have this.
yeah.
You know,
Costuming is a risk. Like we talked. I like the time frame we keep bringing up. Like, when did this movie come out? Oh, a year before the Avengers. So like having more comics accurate costumes was more of a thing now, right? Um, but they were still being careful. Like, yeah, I think the big thing at the time was, okay, we want to make them comics accurate, but it has to be functional to the movie. Like Captain America, the First Avenger, came out this very same year, 2011. And they were real careful about not having this corny suit that looked just like the comics. Instead, they had a battle suit, right? It looked like you could actually wear this in World War II. So similarly, they had the X-Men wear flight suits here. So um, you can tell it's a tough call with these movies, right?
Mhm.
Did you have something, Porfirio?
Yeah, just I guess like, I think I had said this with the X-Men movie is rewatching this, like I was just super interested in like the type of characters, like which X-Men characters they chose, for
Mm-hmm.
this ensemble and what role they had, like I just kept thinking like, oh, Emma Frost is a big character, in the comics. I feel like she didn't have a big like role in this film, and then like you said, like the acting wasn't the best. But
Yeah,
then you have someone like Mystique who didn't have a big role in the original X-Men fact in movies, but she was like Xavier's best friend, growing
yeah,
up in this. I just felt like that was super weird, and
yeah,
and then like yeah, just the ensemble of characters was really interesting. That's the red word I'm looking for because you got like Banshee, Havoc, Angel, like they totally went away from like their usual like X-Men characters of like Cyclops, Jean, Storm. Like they totally chose like a fresh new group of mutants that aren't, I feel like, as popular, with if you say like X-Men, I feel like no one's gonna say, oh, Havoc comes to mind. They're gonna say his brother, Cyclops, so
yeah,
I just thought that was interesting, but really cool that like these lesser known mutants at least got some screen time,
yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. I like your mode of thinking. Like, why did they choose certain characters for certain movies? Yeah, you could sort of tell they were going for some more obscure characters. But the real head scratcher to me for this movie is Havoc, because this takes place in the 60s,
hmm
and Havoc is the brother of Cyclops, right? In fact, he's the younger brother of Cyclops. So why the hell is
Is he
there?
really?
Well, yeah, he is.
Oh,
In fact, yeah, he's
oh
the younger
shit.
brother of Scott Summers. So so why the hell is there a Havoc character? He's named Alex Summers in the movie also. Um, why is he in this movie? And then like decades later in the timeline, we see Cyclops, who is, I guess, his supposed to be his brother, or maybe like I don't know, maybe in this film universe they aren't brothers. I don't know. It's kind of
No, because I
weird.
mean, I mean, in Apocalypse, he's introduced like with this timeline. Um, Scott Summers is introduced, but he's introduced as Havoc's little brother.
Oh, okay. So they
Eh,
flipped it, I guess. But
did, but it's still like, you know,
the,
two
yeah,
de
the,
20 years apart, which is a
yeah,
little
decades
strange.
later. So I don't know. And you make a great point, Porfirio, about the whole Raven Charles thing. So they're like best friends, right? Childhood friends. But later in the film series, they like don't even acknowledge each other, right? So that's
hmm
super weird. So there's some holes here, some plot holes for sure.
Oh, there's a lot of plot holes.
Yeah.
Rewatching this entire series, there's a lot of plot holes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Keep
the
in
X-Men
mind this is
hmm
continuity.
this is pre-connected universe stuff,
Yeah.
right? So they took some liberties, let's just say that. All right. So, oh, did you have something, Porfirio?
No, no.
Okay, you're
Uh,
good. Okay. Let's move on. So the next movie on our list is the next movie in chronological order. X-Men: Days of Future Past. This was Christian's pick. And let me read the synopsis for this one from IMDb. The X-Men send Wolverine to the past in a desperate effort to change history and prevent an event that results in doom for both humans and mutants. All right, what'd you think of this one upon rewatching, Christian?
Yeah, X-Men Days of Futures Past. Oh yeah, this movie's great. So this movie came out actually May 23rd, 2014. So uh it's a we're about 2 weeks past its 10-year anniversary.
Oh, hey,
Hey.
yeah.
So
Good timing.
yeah, we planned that, of course. So yeah, and this movie's great. I love this movie. Saw it in theaters. I loved it then, rewatched it, I've seen it a few times and I still love it. This is probably my personal favorite X-Men movie that we've seen. Um, this movie, yeah, coming out in 2014, I guess, as the time. This is shortly after the first Avengers movies came out and, took the world by storm. So I imagine Fox really wanted their own big crossover movie. They wanted to one up Disney Marvel with the X-Men. They had First Class, that was a pretty good hit, and they're like, "Oh, well, what if we had a crossover between the old X-Men and the new
Mhm,
X-Men?"
mhm,
Enough time had passed where, I think, there was a bit of nostalgia for the old X-Men as well.
mhm,
So they really wanted to mash the two together, and of course, Days of Futures Past is a great story to adapt to do so. It's all about the Sentinels, which big X-Men villain that we haven't seen yet, and involves Wolverine going back to the past, going back to the 1970s now to stop Mystique from shooting Bolivar Trask and pretty much getting captured and having her DNA spliced into the Sentinels. And so, yeah, this movie, like I said, a few times before, this movie's great. So, I love time travel movies. I'm definitely a sucker for those. And I think the way that this does time travel is pretty cool. The way it kind of introduces the concept in the very beginning, where you see the Sentinels kill a bunch of people. They kill Cyclops. I forget a bishop's. I think Sunspots in the movie, and he
mhm,
gets killed.
mhm,
And you have this like little team of X-Men at the beginning, and that kind of introduces the concept. And then of course they go and they meet everyone, and you see, oh man, Magneto and Professor X are working together again. You've seen that the world is extremely dark, extremely bleak. It's very dystopian. And but now in their old age, in this different timeline, uh this dystopia has kind of brought the two factions together. And in an effort to make their last stand, uh they need to send Wolverine back to the past to kind of bring Charles Xavier out of his slump and break Magneto out of jail to stop Mystique from shooting Trask. And of course, the X-Men are pretty much completely disbanded. The Professor X is a very far cry from who he's supposed to be. He's kind of this drunk. He doesn't want to use his powers because it brings him pain. And he has a really great. I really like his arc in the film of how he goes from uh, being the complete opposite of the character because of a setback into the person he is now. And of course, Wolverine has to teach him how to be this character, how to really become Professor X again. And you get
mhm,
to see like a nice flip on the roles, whereas because Professor X is usually seen as the father figure to Wolverine in a lot of these movies, especially in the later movie Logan. And so this movie this movie, of course, also features, I think, the iconic Quicksilver scene. I think it's another
Oh
really
yeah.
big X-Men, one of the big X-Men iconic moments
Mm-hmm.
as well, where you get the really cool slow motion as they break out Magneto out of jail, or out of the prison, where he's below the Pentagon, several floors down, and you get to see how it is. Well, it's a cool little set piece. How would they, hold this guy who can control metal? Well, everything is plastic. Um, and then I think there's also um, a lot of great tension throughout the movie. I think the time travel element, and the fact that you never know how far away the Sentinels are most of the time, and so you're really like, come on, like, you got to hurry up, Wolverine. Like you see snippets here and there of what's going on, and how it feels like this is the last hope for this entire world.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in the slower moments, there's still like quite a lot of tension because of that, because you have that in the back of your mind that Wolverine's on borrowed time here. And so it also kind of paves way for some nice little callbacks to other X-Men movies. X2, because features Stryker, is
Mm-hmm.
in the movie, and you get to see some changes with Wolverine's storyline. You get the cool bone claws because it's pre-Weapon X. And let's see, what else do I want to say about this movie? And I think that um, like uh, Peter Dinklage was also a really hot actor at the time, since hot actors kind of make their way in these big uh, kind of roles. And so he was coming off of the Game of Thrones fame. He plays Bolivar Trask, and he doesn't have a ton to do, I think, in the movie, but I think that's okay. He doesn't need to be this big Magneto-like presence, because of course you have Magneto there to kind of just uh, cause chaos, when you need to have like your superhero fight. And I think um, he does a pretty good job as Bolivar Trask for the little that you see him. And so yeah, um, big fan of this movie. I really like the arcs. I really like the story, and like I said, this is my personal favorite. I think the road cut is a nice addition. I think I watched it at your place, Porfirio, a long time
Mm-hmm.
ago.
Mm-hmm.
I only saw it on DVD. I've never seen it since. I think on streaming, maybe here and there, but they might have had it at one point. But
Yeah, I've never seen it streaming either, but it's a good addition.
it's a good addition. It doesn't, from what I remember, it's like in a director's cut. I like that it adds like an entire little subplot in the future and
Mm-hmm.
fleshes that out a little bit more. But it's not necessary to enjoy the film.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, high recommendation for this movie.
Right on. So I guess since we've been doing it for the first couple, this one, like you said, is 10 years old now. Um, does it feel dated at all to you, Christian?
Let's see. I actually don't think this feels too dated. I think maybe a little bit the CGI with the Sentinels kind of at the beginning, but I thought it still looked pretty good. I You could definitely tell I think they upped the budget quite a lot
Hmm.
after the success of First Class. And I think they really wanted to go all out. They had to superhero movies were super hot, so
Hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
was kind of they struck while the iron was hot,
Right
so to
on.
speak. And I think it looks pretty good. It doesn't deal as much with the 70s kind of flavor, I think, as much as First Class did with the 60s, but the movie's kind of go 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 the entire time, that it didn't really have time to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it still holds up pretty well.
Nice. Here's one thing I wanted to bring up. I haven't seen this movie in a while, but one thing that struck me a bit was the design of the Sentinels. Um, for me, the Sentinels have always been those huge, massive robots that we see in the X-Men animated series, right? I'm used to seeing the Sentinels in that form or like the original comics form, just big, huge robots, right? Now here, they're kind of like medium-sized robots. I don't know. I always felt that they didn't look quite right to me. Now, yeah, how do you guys feel about the Sentinel designs for this movie?
The ones from the future or the 70s?
Well,
Because
that's a
there's
good
two.
question. Yeah,
Oh
because
yeah.
I don't really remember the far future ones, but I remember the ones from the 70s. They were kind of small and they were kind of humanoid looking, right?
Uh-huh.
But were the far future ones like bigger?
Mm,
Uh,
not really.
uh
No, they just were like
They had a
upgraded.
different design. They were like
mhm.
much sleeker looking in a way.
Okay.
Like they didn't have the. I don't think they had the purple.
Yeah, they didn't have they definitely looked very like yeah, futuristic and um yeah, like Christian said, very sleekish and just, be able, because they're robots mixed with Mystique's DNA, they were just be able to like transform into different kinds of um types, like with
Hmm.
like diamond outerwear or fire or ice or
Oh yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
So I thought that was pretty cool, but for the 70s look of the Sentinels, I thought that was pretty cool just as I was able to recognize them right away. Like
Mm,
the size didn't matter to me, but like I was able to just recognize the design right away and just be like, "Oh shit, like that's the Sentinels like design I remember from the animated series, you know?"
mm, mm.
Um whereas like the futuristic ones, I honestly, when I first saw it in theaters, didn't know they were the Sentinels until
Oh yeah.
like one of the characters said like, "Oh, the Sentinels are here." I'm like, "What? That's crazy, but dangerous looking, you know?"
Yeah, yeah. Got it. So there was enough of the look and feel so that you
Mhm.
still felt connected.
Yeah.
Connected.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I just felt they weren't big enough. I don't know.
That's
That,
true. They
that's
weren't.
my minor thing. Yeah.
It wasn't like even though like in X3 they fought him in the training room. They
Oh,
fought one
right.
big sentinel, and that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
pretty massive, but of
Yeah.
course that wasn't a real sentinel.
Mhm.
Right. Right. Right.
So that
Yeah.
was kind of their little nod. Yeah, these I guess because the sentinels were so different, like when you see them in the 70s, they're like in the prototype stage and they're really just controlled by Magneto. And then in the far future, I guess because it's supposed to be the future and they've mixed with Mystique's DNA, they thought, "Oh, okay, we'll just give them a much different look."
Yeah.
So it's
Random
not quite there.
random fact, but again, because I was looking at all this research for all these films and stuff, the Sentinels were actually planned as early as like X-Men 1 and 2. But again,
Mm.
it was the early 2000s. There wasn't much faith in superhero films, so they just never had the budget to make like a good, proper effect for the Sentinels. That's why like in X-Men
Mm.
The Last Stand, like you mentioned, Henry, that it's there, but you just don't see like the
Yeah.
full figure. You just see like kind of like a head of like
Right.
when Logan tosses it. But like a lot of the early drafts for like the X-Men films, the original three X-Men films, there was always a want and desire of the the producers to involve the Sentinels in some way, whether they were going to be a villain or be used in the danger room. But the technology at the time and the budget was just not there for that.
Hmm.
Yeah, that
Ah,
makes sense.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a reason why we haven't seen a live action giant Sentinel in its full glory, or for that matter, Galactus, right? There's just budgetary constraints, right? It's bottom line. All
He was a
right.
cloud in
There you
Rises.
go. Right. They had to go a totally different way. Yep. All right. Um, yeah, any last thoughts on Days of Future Past before we move on here?
You know, I a lot of points that Christian put out, like I this is my favorite X-Men movie. I think it's just because of that like whole like time travel storyline and the use of both like the original X-Men characters and the new X-Men characters. Like that's like I think you said Christian, like that's really never been seen before, you know? Like a multiverse kind of thing going on, you know? Um and a big reason why I love the X-Men is just like this like talk about like them being misfits, society not accepting them, and I feel like that was kind of like a ongoing theme throughout um the film of just them being like hunted down, and nobody wants them because they're freaks, and you know it's just such a still relevant theme that's going on today, and I don't know, it's just a really powerful film. I think it's one of my favorite films because it has a good story. It's so rewatchable of the action. I love the Magneto scene at the end, the speech that he has when he addresses the nation. It's very on par with like the X-Men 97 episode 2 speech, It's very, very, very similar. So, this was it's a really good movie. It's really
Mhm.
top up there. And there's even that like callback to that cameo that you pointed out, Henry, from First Class.
Oh yeah, there is.
Right on.
Now, Professor X says it's a Wolverine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's worth repeating that it's really cool how there's this thing going on with the old X-Men and the new X-Men crossing paths, like um hadn't really seen anything like that before and kind of haven't seen it since. Like you mentioned, it's it's sort of reminiscent of the multiverse, but it's not, right? It's more of like a time travel thing. It's
Hmm.
it's not a different dimension, not a different universe. It's just like, yeah, uh, different incarnations on the timeline, right? Um, so it's cool, like that, you get the James McAvoy and Patrick Stewart, Professor X, and you get the Michael Fassbender and the Ian McKellen Magneto, right? That in itself is pretty awesome, right?
Yep.
So yeah,
You know,
cool.
one thing I really I remember I read an article that addressed this, and I didn't laugh until I noticed it. And I want to hear your guys' thoughts, but I was reading this article when this movie first came out, how this movie is very, we talk about the diversity within like the X-Men, which is really cool, but um if you rewatch the film, you'll notice that like all like the white American mutants are inside the safe, like inside the thing where Wolverine is,
Oh,
and
the temple.
all the temple, and the people of color like Storm, Bishop, Blink, and Sunspot are all outside defending, being like the sacrifices to the Sentinels, while even fucking Iceman is inside, safe, you know?
Oh yeah, you're right. Oh wow. I
Hmm.
didn't catch that actually,
Oops.
but oops, Bryan Singer's got some explaining to do.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not that was intentional, I just thought that was fucking hilarious and so true.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It almost doesn't matter if it was intentional or not. It's just kind of fucked up and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
weird in retrospect.
Yeah. Kind of wonder how did they not see that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Similarly, this definitely was kind of an eyebrow raiser when I watched X-Men First Class. There's a character named Darwin who I don't believe was like from the comics. I don't know. I'm not familiar with this character. Um, but he's played by a black actor,
Mhm,
and he's basically like killed off very early on,
mhm,
right? And it's like, okay, you find like the one black mutant, there, or the one black male mutant there, and he's
mhm.
like the sacrificial lamb,
Right.
basically, right? It's like, of course, it's the black guy who gets killed first, like,
Right.
yeah, it's just, okay, well, yeah, and like we were talking about like dated aspects to these movies, and I think we're calling out a couple here. All right. So, yeah, let's move on to just kind of the broader conversation about the Fox live action X-Men movies. We talked about like our three picks in detail, but what about the film series as a whole? Um, yeah. So we kind of discussed this a bit with the DC EU film series about like what's the legacy. What's the legacy of these movies? This is a 20-year period. A lot of people went to see these movies. These movies made a lot of money for Fox,
Mhm.
but at the end of the day, what do we think the legacy is for these movies?
Hmm.
I mean, I think similar to like the DC films, like whether or not how Marvel is gonna treat the X-Men characters, I feel like our generation is just gonna be like, this is where it all started, this was the blueprint, the forerunner, not just for like, Henry, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, not just for the X-Men franchise, but I feel like for the superhero genre, you know?
Yeah.
Like it was like the MCU came out like uh like 2008, you know. The DCEU didn't come out till like 2010, 2012, if I remember correctly. Um and then like all the early 2000 films, Tobey Maguire films, Fantastic Four, um, those like died out really early in the 2000s, but the X-Men franchise has has been like the longest like superhero franchise so far, which is a span of 2 decades. So I think like, history's just gonna like look back at this and just be like, this was a golden age for the X-Men films, and for geeks to just appreciate these films. There's definitely a good films in there, and definitely there were some rotten eggs for sure. But I think that it's just a legacy that definitely deserves respect in every way, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, solid points.
Yeah, I agree. Um, like you have like Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is definitely, I think, front and center of
Mhm,
this entire franchise. And like, a lot of like the X-Men movies, he was front and center, and of course he had his three um solo movies, and of course he'll be in Wolverine and Deadpool. And so like what was I gonna say? He kind of carried this. the franchise in a similar way as Iron Man kind of carries the MCU. I think
Mhm.
Hugh Jackman more so than Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man,
Mhm.
but he was very much the face of it, you know. And I think to the detriment of a few other characters, I think characters that we really seen have really come back in X-Men 97, Cyclops and Gambit being the two ones. Yeah, and like no Gambit in any of these movies.
Except one.
Let's see. Oh, he was in what was it X-Men Origins, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That's
Yeah,
right.
the worst one, arguably.
And he there was plans to make a Channing Tatum Gambit.
There was,
That's
yeah.
right.
Unfortunately,
Yeah.
that was around for years. They were talking
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
about it, but it never materialized.
Mhm.
And so I think for the future, I really hope he gets his due. He deserves his time in the sun.
Mhm.
And so, but I really am thinking back to like that 2014, like that 2010s era, where it's kind of crazy to think there were like three major superhero franchises all competing each other at the same
Mhm.
time, where you have the MCU, you have the DCU, and you have the Fox X-Men,
Mhm.
and like all of which were kind of like these hits in their own ways. There was a couple flops here and there. The MCU was I think far and away the leader during this time,
Mhm.
but it is quite a period for these movies. A period that who knows if we'll ever see again. But uh like what rewatching these of course like brings a lot of nostalgia to that time, and we're thinking, oh
Mhm.
man, what's going to happen next,
Mhm.
what can they really do. And it's great that we got to see two different kind of takes on it, on the X-Men, one with the original during the kind of pre-MCU, and then you kind of see where they were going with the post-MCU, and how the idea of a cinematic universe and a franchise really kind of materialized like during these two periods of X-Men.
Mhm.
Right on. So, yeah, my thoughts on these movies. So, it should be noted that the this film series ended with a real crash and burn, right? The last two movies of this series were Dark Phoenix in 2019 and The New Mutants in 2020, both of which failed spectacularly. Um, just in terms of box office and in terms of quality and just fan reception, just you name it. Um, and things are already kind of going sour with like X-Men Apocalypse, right? So it was really like a bad ending, I would say. But if you look back at the series as a whole, yeah, certainly a hugely significant era of superhero movies. Like I mentioned, a shit ton of people went to see these movies. They made a ton of money for Fox. And like we alluded to earlier, highly influential. You know, that first X-Men movie, dated as it is, um, paved the way. It was groundbreaking
Mhm.
for Marvel and for superhero movies in general. Um, we keep mentioning Hugh Jackman, a huge figure in these movies, and it's amazing that he has come back to this character over and over and over again. And the world loves Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, period. You know, he's just beloved in this role. Can't say enough about that. And speaking of Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, we should call out Logan. We haven't really talked about Logan too
Mhm.
much. Um, Probably the best made movie of all of these. Maybe not a favorite of ours just because it's kind of a downer of a movie and not really like doesn't have a lot of fun factor. But what a great like emotional powerhouse of a movie, right? And
Mhm.
it's cool that it's hard R. Um, yeah, you look at these. movies, and it's kind of perfect that the Wolverine Deadpool movie is going to be rated R because Logan, Deadpool 1, and Deadpool 2 are the only rated R of this bunch. So it's kind of perfect that they're continuing with that. And the rated R really worked for Logan really well. And it really answered the question like, oh, if only we could see Wolverine in an R-rated movie, what would that be like? Right? We were wondering that all these years, right? X-Men, X2, X3, the two solo Wolverine movies. But then, we finally get it. It's like, whoa, holy shit. This is exactly what we wanted. Fuck yeah. Right. So, ups and downs for sure, quality. Um, but there's no question. This is a significant film series that belongs, in the superhero movie Hall of Fame, right? There's definitely worth mentioning these movies. 100%. I will say this, this did come up with the DCEU movies in our discussion, but I feel like these movies did kind of unfortunately do what those DC movies did in a way, and that's kind of follow trends, right? Yes, there were some breaking aspects, but for the most part, they were kind of following what's cool, what's happening. We talked about the black leather suits, kind of following the trends, casting the hot actor of the day, and like with when comics accurate costuming started to get popular. Oh, they started to do that too, right? Get some color in there. Um, X-Men First Class, again, one of my favorites, but it was a prequel. There's no doubt there's some thoughts of like, oh, look at Batman Begins. Look at what they did. Like, let's start from the beginning. Let's go back before the original X-Men timeline, right? So just a lot of like following what was hot, what was going on. Um, and oftentimes the results aren't great when that happens, right? Um, that's movie making in general. But I think it's worth mentioning these X-Men movies definitely kind of followed trends. And oftentimes not in the best way, right? So now I guess the big question now is what's next? Right now, Disney does own the X-Men franchise. So now what? Now that we've seen like what Fox did with these 20 years of live action movies, what are we, I guess a couple questions. What are we hoping Disney does with the X-Men, and what do you think's going to happen? Any predictions?
Hmm.
Thoughts?
Well, they like I guess so far what we've seen Miss Marvel has like teased at the end of Miss Marvel
Mhm.
that oh she
Mm-hmm.
might be a mutant. And then of course the end of the Marvels, we see Monica Rambeau go to the Fox X-Men universe. I jump over and then there's Beast. Um so I my guess is that they're going to do some sort of universe hop or have them maybe not permanently come over, but have some way where the two universes merge so the X-Men and the Avengers can probably fight side by side, probably fighting most likely Kang. I'm gonna guess my guess is that's gonna be um the big scene in like Kang Dynasty or Secret Wars, is these two universes coming together. Maybe they'll fight each other for a bit and then they'll go fight Kang.
Wait. I have a question.
Go
Do you
ahead.
still think they're gonna fight King?
I don't know. Who knows? I think with everything going on Jonathan Majors, they might. Uh,
I mean, cause he's already fired, so
are they gonna recast it? Like maybe.
I
I guess if
mean,
they still stick with Kang, that's my guess. But it is up in the air if they really go with Kang. But I can imagine even if they don't go with Kang,
uh-huh.
they might go with another villain that kind of fills that same role that they were hoping for with Kang, you know.
Well, they did hire or yeah, they did cast Galactus, so
Oh
maybe
yeah.
that could be the big baddie, Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, that's another conversation. But good question. Like with Thanos, they were able to plant that seed pretty early. So I think they were hoping to do that with Kang, where they planted the seed way back in what Loki season 1.
Hmm.
But if it ends up that Galactus is the big bad, I mean that's kind of late in the game. If they're introducing Galactus in the Fantastic Four movie, we're talking just I don't know a couple years. Um, so there won't be that cool lead in, right? So I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. But good call out, Christian. On the question was like, oh, how is Disney going to roll out the X-Men? In a way, they've kind of done it. We've seen some teases here and there, in addition to the end of the Miss Marvel show and the post-credit scene in The Marvels. We mentioned the cool Quicksilver scene in Days of Future Past. We did see that Quicksilver in WandaVision, right? The Evan Peters Quicksilver, which is a really cool little cameo there. I mean, that was hardly a tie-in, but tangentially related. There's also Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness, where Professor X did appear. But none of that really has given us like the full-on like MCU X-Men treatment. And we don't really know exactly how it's all gonna go yet, so it's just speculation right now. But what you mentioned, Christian, I think there's something to that, that there will be some multiversal connection, right? A la the end of the Marvels. Because if the X-Men exist in the MCU universe, like why the hell like do we not hear about it at all? Like it doesn't it makes more sense that they would be introduced through a different universe, right? So I'm kind of banking on that too, that there's going to be some rift in the multiverse and they're going to, meet each other that way. Doesn't really explain why, Miss Marvel is mentioned as being a mutant, but I don't know. Who knows what that was about?
Yeah. It could have been like
Anyway,
an Easter egg, you know.
yeah, I don't know. It might be one of those things that they just kind of sweep under the rug and not mention ever again. I don't know. I don't know. Um, okay, sub question. Do you think Wolverine and Deadpool will address this at all? Will there be any sort of introduction to the X-Men in the MCU in this movie? Will there be a juicy post-credit scene, cameo, Easter egg? What do you think? Any
Like,
thoughts there?
will we see like a full like X-Men ensemble for the MCU or
I mean, I don't think that's gonna happen, but anything, any kind of tease, like maybe we'll see like a silhouette of Cyclops in the background. I don't know, anything along those lines that might be like kind of a an intro to the X-Men in the MCU.
okay, wait. Just for clarification, just so I have my answer correct. So yeah, so you're asking like the MCU's version of the X-Men and not going back to like Fox's X-Men because like they're like cameos and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, I guess just point of clarification. We've seen a lot of teases with the Fox X-Men. We saw
Yeah.
Professor X in Multiverse of Madness. We saw the Fox Beast in the Marvels, right? But yeah, like the true like MCU X-Men, are we gonna get any of that in this new movie?
I don't think so. I feel like the Deadpool and Wolverine movie is gonna heavily rely on the Fox X-Men universe, you know? And I feel like with that in as whole, like that's already like a lot going on, that it just
Mm-hmm.
would be too much to introduce new characters,
Yeah.
I feel like Deadpool and Wolverine is gonna be for this X-Men Fox universe what it was for like MCU and Infinity War, you know? Like it's like this like
Mm.
collection of X-Men characters from the Fox studios, but nothing new was presented, because
Mm. Mm-hmm.
it was just a build up for this storyline, but nothing new was needed to be added to the film to talk about like what's next afterwards. I feel like MCU and Marvel Studios is just gonna do what they did with like the Avengers and just take it like one movie or scene in future Marvel movies at a time. But Deadpool and Wolverine, I don't think is the right movie to start doing that.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah, who kn because Deadpool's also, like, a comedy type character, and, like, I guess there's a lot kinda riding on this movie, and I think there's a lot of anticipation, and I think a lot of people have a lot of those same questions, how will this is this going to bring X-Men into the MCU in some way,
Hmm.
you know? And, like, how is this gonna be a send off to the Fox X-Men? Will this kind of shed more light on what the end of, the Marvels? And so, like, that is a lot riding on the comedy movie with the comedy character, who's kinda meant to be
Hmm.
off in kind of his own world. He's not really part of the X-Men, he has his own X-Force
Mm-hmm.
in Deadpool 2. He's just the trainee is the running joke.
He has Peter on the X
Mhm.
Force.
Oh, yeah.
All
And
right.
another amazing cameo, I guess a little aside, the Invisible Man. But, yeah, it's like, oh, I don't know how this will, like, have the ramifications for the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a feeling they'll wanna bring Deadpool to the MCU in some
Yeah.
fashion.
Yeah.
Because they teased the TVA
Yes.
in one of the
Hmm.
trailers, so I feel like
Mm-hmm.
they wanna bring him, and I feel like it's just gonna be him, is the only character out of the entire universe they're gonna wanna pluck out and then put in the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
It works for Deadpool because he can reference the Fox deal, he can reference, the meta commentary of what's going on outside of just the fictional universe of the X-Men and the MCU. But I have a feeling this is, a lot of the actors are probably done. They'll show up. I imagine they'll show up for Secret Wars, but I can't imagine they'll like stay too much more. I can imagine
Mm-hmm.
Wolverine, Hugh Jackman has been mentioning that he's been pretty done with the role. He keeps going back and he seems to really like it. And
When the paycheck's good.
yeah, and he
Yeah.
puts in a good performance. It's not like he phones it in, and
Yeah.
whenever
Yeah.
he plays it. But he did say that the role he's been playing this for 24 years now, and he said that the role is so physically taxing on his body that it's just
Hmm.
hard to keep up
Yeah.
doing this kind of thing. It's hard to maintain that superhero physique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also want to add, I think I read this somewhere that they're like we talk about like all these like X-Men films and everything. I believe like the way Deadpool is gonna address it is that these actually come from different um universes, like each the films, like the Wolverine in that we're gonna see in Deadpool is from a different universe than from like Logan. or like the OG X-Men films.
Mm, really?
Yeah, so that's why there's like all these like characters that are coming from previous Fox films because they all come from like different universes, you know. Um, but I don't remember, yeah, like because it was like I feel like it was Kevin Feige who said like, oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this Wolverine comes from Earth whatever, this one comes from like Earth whatever, you know,
Yeah,
and um, so I guess to answer your question, Henry, I just don't see these X-Men characters staying too long in the MCU, you know.
got it. Yeah. That is funny how it was mentioned that like the X-Men movies aren't a connected universe per se, like different Wolverines in different movies. It's kind of a cheap explanation for all the plot holes we mentioned, basically, right?
Right, right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but it makes sense. Like literally in the Wolverine Origins movie, Deadpool is in that movie, right? Wade Wilson is in the movie, but it's not the Deadpool we know at all, right?
Mhm.
So that could not possibly be in the same universe. So I guess they had to explain it somehow. So there you go. That said, so you wanted clarification on, oh, are we talking about the Fox X-Men or are we talking about the new MCU X-Men? So that question implies that the MCU X-Men are going to be like entirely new. Do we think that's going to be the case? You don't think there's going to be any like carryover? Like Christian mentioned Deadpool. I think that's obvious that Deadpool's going to like continue on in the MCU, but any other mutants? Like, are all the Fox, are all the other Fox mutants going to be like gone? Is it just going to be a whole new slate? We don't think any of those actors are going to be back in the MCU at all?
I mean, my opinion is no. Like
Hmm.
like the OG X-Men actors, they're all older, like Hugh Jackman, they probably just want to move on from a role that they had played like 2 decades ago, you
Mm-hmm.
know? And then the new X-Men cast from like Days of Future Past and First Class, I feel like besides the exception of James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender,
Mm-hmm.
um, the others weren't as well liked,
Yeah.
like young Cyclops, young Jean Grey, young Storm, and Apocalypse. No one really cared
Yeah.
for them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, I just feel like MCU Marvels will be all right with just like having their own like actors come in
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
these roles.
Now that
Yeah.
said, I could almost see a world where there could be a McAvoy, Xavier, a Fassbender, Magneto, and a Hugh Jackman Wolverine in the MCU. I could see that, like number one, the Wolverine character is like a timeless character, right? He ages super slowly, right? And there literally is a comic storyline, Old Man Logan, right? So there is an old Wolverine in the comics. So they could easily have like an old actor playing Wolverine in the MCU. If Hugh Jackman's on board, I could see something like that happening. And with McAvoy and Fassbender, they're playing characters who historically are older characters, right? Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen played them, right? Older actors. So McAvoy and Fassbender are getting older, but they're not old men yet, right? So I could see them potentially making an appearance, reprising those roles at some point, possibly. You never know. I mean, I don't know if any of those would be like significant roles. It might be more cameos, or like kind of like what Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield did in No Way Home. But I wouldn't rule that out. I wouldn't rule something like that out.
You know, this is. Oh, go ahead, Christian.
Hmm. I
Go
was gonna
ahead.
say, like, I think it might be a good idea to bring a new X-Men in. I think with doing it, I think the biggest thing like that they'll have to do is they'll have to rewrite Magneto's origin story a bit. Um, because the Holocaust was 80 years ago now. Um, and so like what would they do with Magneto? And of course him and Charles Xavier are generally supposed to be around the same age.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll have to find a way to kind of in a sense that kind of rewrite a few things about the X-Men to make the characters younger,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Uh but I think maybe with a reboot, they could bring a lot of fresh ideas back into the mix, kind of the same way they did for First Class, bring in a fresh new cast, and then I think really give some X-Men that were um, may not have kind of been put to the wayside in the movies for a while, kind of bring them back. I think Cyclops,
Hmm.
I mentioned Gambit. They really haven't done really much of any Gambit. And I think really give us a cast. I think they can give us a cast that pretty much resembles a bit of the 97, 92 X-Men cast,
Mm-hmm.
and you really get to see them in full and like, kind of their full glory with the brightly colored suits that are all different. We can show Wolverine in the mask, you know,
Yeah.
and have these very comic accurate suits, very brightly colored, but also maybe kind of change a lot of the origins around,
Mm-hmm.
to make it a little
Yeah.
bit more modern.
That is a good point about Magneto. Like with the timeline, the Holocaust doesn't really line up so well now. But it's such a cool origin, right? Like the fact that Magneto is a child of the Holocaust brings such like a real world weight to the character, right? So for them to have to change that would be kind of unfortunate, but yeah, they would have to change it somehow. It just wouldn't really line up otherwise.
Yeah, I have
Okay,
no idea what to do, but
I know
we'll
that's a
we'll have
tough
to think of
one.
something. Yeah.
I don't
You
know,
know,
time jump or some sort of portal. I don't know.
this is my hot take of how the MCU is going to treat the X-Men franchise.
All right.
My hot take is with the Marvel Studios that the future and I don't know if profit is the right word, is the X-Men animation stuff, you know. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like they shouldn't I feel like fans, especially now with 97, are gonna have such high standards with how the Marvel Studios is gonna um do the live action X-Men stuff that it's just not gonna live up to what
Mm,
fans
Mm,
want, and that Marvel Studios should just like focus on the X-Men in the animated universe, you know?
yeah.
Like I think maybe like one or two X-Men films might be good, like have like mutants come up every now and then, like Miss Marvel, Namor, um, give Storm her own movie, or have her connect back to like when she was Black Panther's wife, have her involved in a Black Panther movie. But this is again just my hot take. I just don't think like Marvel should be focusing on a live action X-Men cast and just go and focus on what they've already done with the animations.
mm,
I like that take. I do like that take. And I think it makes me think of what you mentioned, Christian, like this Wolverine Deadpool movie is going to be like a big test. Like a lot of people are going to be looking at this and how it does at the box office and how it's going to be received. It might dictate how live action X-Men goes, right? Because like you're saying, Porfirio, the animated stuff is so beloved that they don't necessarily have to do X-Men live action like right now, right? They're the X-Men um desire is being fulfilled right now with the animated stuff, right? It kind of reminds me of Miles Morales. Like for a long time, people were saying, "Oh fuck, like Miles is gonna be in the MCU. It's just a matter of time. I can't wait. How are they gonna do it?" Right? They had
Hmm.
that little mention in No Way Home. Um, but that's kind of died down a bit because the Spider-Verse movies are so fucking good, right?
Hmm.
That's filling that desire. And I feel like Sony slash Disney can sort of take their time, right? They can kind of feel out the waters and like, okay, let's just find the perfect time to do the live action thing. We don't have to do it right now. And like, I feel the same way with the X-Men. Like, just write out this animated series phenomenon and just sort of like pick the timing, pick your window, right? Just so. You don't have to do it right now. So yeah, I mean, I'm on board with what you're saying. They don't have to rush into anything here. Okay, here's a fun question. Um, Porfirio, you brought this up earlier off mic. But with the prospect of the X-Men joining the MCU, that would mean that in the MCU, we would not have just one superhero super team, the Avengers, but two, the Avengers and the X-Men.
Hmm.
So, with the prospect of these two teams, who would you rather join? Would you rather join the Avengers or the X-Men? Porfirio, you pose the question, so why don't you start us off here?
I feel like if you asked me this back, like even as like far back as January, I would have said Avengers. But after this year, without a doubt, X-Men for sure. I feel like I
Mm-hmm.
relate to them. I think
Mm-hmm.
like their stories are cooler and better. I'm sorry for Spider-Man and Scarlet Witch because I love those characters to death, but I'm I choose X-Men. I feel like they're more grounded as a team,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I relate to them and I understand where they're coming from. And Avengers, like you said, Henry, off my like Falcon and Winter Soldier, there's no health benefits,
Yeah.
They,
Sam Wilson was like broke. That's not cool. That's not
um,
fun.
um, yeah, like I feel like the Avengers, they break up, they get together, no one knows what the hell's happening, they're all over the place. Um, it's a fucking mess with Avengers. Not to say X-Men isn't a mess, but they get through the mess together, and I feel like Avengers like kind of is kind of like their own man, each person for themselves kind of thing. But that's just yeah. I X-Men now.
Right. How about you, Christian?
Yeah. Let's see. So I guess if I was going for like, I think like, you know, what team would I think would be like the more powerful team? I'd probably pick the Avengers as far as like, oh well, I'm the superhero. I want to join like, join the more powerful team. But I think the I think if I was just gonna hang out, you know, if I was just gonna just live in the world, I do love, like, home base I love as a big fan of Batman, I love, like, characters with home bases, and really cool layers, like the Batcave, and I think for Marvel, I think that version is, the school, where they all hang out, Like, I think it'd be cool, you're growing up in this school, learning to use your powers with uh, um, others that are also learning to use their powers at the same time. You get to fight in the danger room. You get to go on the cool ship, and of course, with X-Men, uh, it's got to have its soap opera drama, relationship drama that you kind of get to see firsthand. Be see what these love triangles are going on and be a part of the soap opera yourself. I think that there's like if I was just gonna like hang out somewhere, I think I would love to just hang out with the X-Men.
You guys are bringing up some really good points here. I think you're kind of swaying my opinion because, like, when the question was first posed, I was saying, "Oh, it's got to be Avengers, of course." And well, first off, I would want to know a few things before answering this. So, like, what powers would I have, right? Because if you're in the X-Men, you're definitely going to have powers. You're a mutant, right? You have mutant powers. It's just a matter of what. But also, like, um, in as an Avenger, you don't necessarily have powers. Like, Hawkeye and Black Widow don't have superpowers. So
Mhm.
I would want to know that up front. Like, I wouldn't say Avengers if I had no superpowers, right? Okay, I would say Avengers only if I had superpowers. Even then, you guys are kind of selling me on the X-Men. Why? Because, like you're saying, Porfirio, the X-Men are more relatable, They're the misfits. I dig that vibe. Um, and like you're saying, Christian, it'd just be a cooler hang, right? Like with the Avengers, like you don't know where certain members are at different times. Like there's a period like years where they're like, where's Hulk and Thor? I don't know. Who knows where they are, right? I don't know. And just it's just scattered, right? And it seems like a little bit unorganized, whereas X-Men seem a lot more organized. Yeah. So the big selling point with the Avengers to me is like you would be at the highest level of superheroing, right? It's like the major leagues of superheroing. Like if you want to battle like the biggest threats to the universe, you want to be on the Avengers, right? It's like yeah, basically you're a major league superhero if you're on the Avengers, right? X-Men, okay, yeah, maybe not, maybe not. So it's like, you ask a professional athlete, like, what league do you want to be playing in, right? You want to be playing in the league that has the best in the world, right? So that's why you would pick the Avengers. Um, but yeah, I get what you guys are saying. And the whole like organization thing, like being part of the X-Men, like they actually practice. They got that danger room, like you guys were saying. Like it seems like the Avengers, they don't really practice that much, right? They're just kind of thrown into situations and they got to figure it out. That's very stressful. Like with the X-Men, they got the danger room, they got all these scenarios, and they know who's gonna do what, and everyone has their role. Um, yeah. So yeah, dude, I think I'm gonna go with the X-Men here.
Here's another question I think to maybe sway you to X-Men side. Who would you rather have as your boss, Professor X or Nick Fury?
Oh,
Wait,
yeah,
wait, wait, wait. Professor X or Nick Fury?
Yeah,
yeah,
because of course,
yeah.
if you're in the Avengers, you have to answer to Nick Fury.
I would have thought
Whereas
Iron
if you're in
Man.
the X-Men, you have to answer to Professor X. You know?
Um, then without a doubt, Professor X. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not.
I agree. I go with Professor X also, but you bring to light yet another problem because it's not necessarily Fury who's calling the shots, right? That's another point of like an unorganized atmosphere with X-Men, right? Is it Fury who's calling the shots? Like literally in the Captain America Winter Soldier movie, he tells Captain America, I guess you're calling the shots now, Cap. Like, no one's listening to me, so just listen to Captain America, right? And then other times people are listening to Stark, and it's just like chaos, right? Um, so yeah, that's even more points, going to the X-Men. And even the Fury or Professor X thing. Like, yeah, I would rather be managed by Professor X any day. Like, he's very like empathetic, right? He's not barking orders, and he's like a cool guy. He wants to teach you stuff, and yeah, definitely Xavier all the way.
Mhm. But now, I don't know if I'm like an evil guy, but I'd go f for sure Magneto, Team Magneto.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, yeah. So that's a good call out, good segue. So like, yeah, now that we're all kind of on board with like siding with the X-Men and the Avengers or X-Men argument, like, what kind of mutant would you want to be, right? So as we've seen, there's all these different factions, right? There's the X-Men, headed by Professor X, but then there's Magneto. We saw this at the end of First Class, where a bunch of mutants jump ship. They leave Professor X and they go off to Magneto, right? So at the end of the movie, we saw Emma Frost and Mystique join sides with him. Um, and then
His
even in that
Brotherhood,
movie, what's that, Porfirio?
the Brotherhood.
Yes, yes. And even in that movie, there is a different faction that Magneto was fighting against, the
Hmm.
Sebastian Shaw, Kevin Bacon group, essentially the Hellfire Club,
Hmm.
right? Um, so yeah, I guess that's the question. Like, what kind of mutant would you want to be? So
And then
not necessarily X-Men, but yeah, what kind of mutant would you want to be?
and then don't forget the New Mutants. They got their own movie also.
There you go. Yep, exactly. And
It was
there's
horrible, but the
X-Force,
No one's joining that team.
there's X-Force, Deadpool,
Yeah,
X-Force. Yeah.
yeah. So Porfirio, you're saying you would want to be on Team Magneto all the way, is that right?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Now, caveat, like the live action Magneto, I would say, is much more villainous than the X-Men 97 Magneto, right?
Hmm.
Would you still want to join forces with the Fox live action Magneto?
Yes.
You would. Oh,
Yes.
without any hesitation. I like that.
I just kept thinking throughout the film. I was like, throughout the films, you will rewatch all the films, and I feel like a lot of shit that the X-Men like went through was a lot of it was like Professor Xavier's fault, you know?
Mm,
Like Jean became like the Dark Phoenix because Xavier like entrapped that side of her in X-Men 3. And then when she was unleashed, like Professor Xavier was always like, "Oh, I did it for your own good, yada yada yada," And again, that even translates to the James McAvoy Professor X when he said that to Mystique. I did it for your own good, like,
mm.
like I'm protecting you, yada yada yada. And I just feel like again, like all these mistakes that the films go through, you could point the finger back at Professor X, and Magneto's actually the one trying to clean it all up in his way.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, yeah, I'm kind of with you. There was a line of dialogue in First Class that really struck me, and Charles is saying to Eric, you know, killing Shaw will not bring you peace. And Magneto says, peace was never an option, right? And it speaks volumes with the character, right? Because he's been through it, right?
Hmm.
And it just doesn't work. Like standing idly by and being the good Samaritan, like it's never worked out for him, right? He has to take action. He has no other option, right? So I definitely get where you're coming from. I would struggle though with that. Like X-Men 97 Magneto, I could definitely get behind, but in the live action stuff, either the young one or the older one, I think I might be on Team Xavier there.
Yeah, do
Um,
the ends justify the means? Like I
uh,
Yeah.
said, I don't know if I can give up the house and the danger,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
That's the thing. When you're with Magneto, you're probably in a bunker. You're probably
that's
you're
true.
stuck in a room hanging out with the Juggernaut, man. Like I would be sweating bullets if I had to be in the same room as the Juggernaut or Sabretooth. Like, whereas,
You,
like, if you're hanging out with Cyclops, yeah, Cyclops could kill you. You'd feel much more at ease,
you'd
next
be
to
running
Storm
away
and
from,
Cyclops.
yeah, running away from the law a lot of
Yeah.
times, you know.
Whereas, like, you're with Magneto, you're in a bunker, and like they're like plotting to kill people, and you're like, oh man, please, I don't want to. I really can't mess with Sabretooth right now. I don't want to piss this guy off. Otherwise, he's just gonna murder me. He's not gonna talk it out. He's just gonna murder me because I
Yeah,
looked at him wrong. Uh-oh, uh-oh.
So we all belong to different X-Men groups.
I guess so.
All
Yep.
mutant groups, different mutant groups.
Yeah. See, it's just like the theme of X-Men 97. It's all, fractured. There's no unity.
We're we're all gonna clash with each other at one
Yeah,
point.
exactly, exactly. Okay, so we're running a little long, but we did tease the ranking, right? So, Porfirio, you actually watched all of these movies
hmm
incredibly
hmm
recently. So, why don't you give us your ranking of the Fox X-Men movies?
Okay, do you want me to go from most liked to least liked, or how do you want me to do it?
Ooh,
Least to best, I think.
yeah, I
Worst
think
to
that's
best.
I think that's good. Yeah.
Do you want me to give like a one sentence explanation, or just read it off?
I would say just read them off and then we can just kind of chime in afterward. Yeah.
Okay. So in last place, wait, you said last place, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Last. Okay, okay. In last place, I put New Mutants, and then X-Men Dark Phoenix, X-Men 3, The Last Stand, X-Men Apocalypse, X-Men Origins Wolverine, The Wolverine, X-Men 2, at the sixth spot, Deadpool 2, first X-Men First Class, and fourth, the OG X-Men film, third, Deadpool 1, number 2, Logan, and in my top spot is X-Men Days of Future Past.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for the most part that matches up with the popular opinion. Yeah. Um, let's see. One might argue that First Class maybe belongs higher than the first X-Men movie, possibly. Um,
I was considering it. Yeah,
yeah.
for sure, for sure.
Was part of that just kind of the historical significance of the first movie?
Definitely. I mean, like, if you were to ask me, like, which one I'd rewatch and which one has a better storyline, in a heartbeat, I'll say First Class, you
Mm,
know. But
okay,
I think just X-Men has a large historical significance is why I just placed it a little bit higher than First Class.
got it.
Mhm.
Any
Yep.
of these rankings raise an eyebrow to you, Christian?
Let's see. I mean, I'd say this list is pretty close to I think the own list I compiled while we were watching a bunch of these movies and putting these together. Um, let's see. I think I would say Days of Futures Past is my personal favorite X-Men movie, but I ended up putting Logan higher. I think that that is usually kind of goes as the popular opinion is the best X-Men movie.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's really just because like the movie's kind of just this big emotional ride, you know? It's the most emotionally resonant, it's really dark, it's very serious, and I think it's just a really, really well-written story. Whereas Days of Futures Past is just more of it's the fun roller coaster ride, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's the one I'd much rather rewatch Days of Futures Past than Logan because Logan is uh a much darker movie, you know? But Logan is like, Logan's Logan, you know?
Yeah.
If it's not 1, it's probably 2, you know?
Right.
Yep.
Mhm.
Now, Christian, you did slide us your list also, and the one thing that really stood out is that you have the Wolverine Origins movie dead last, much lower than Porfirio's ranking. How do we feel about like, well, why do you have that one so low?
Uh, X-Men Origins Wolverine, I think
Yeah.
let's see, well, it has been a while. I think that's also a very popular, like, one of the worst superhero movies, worst of the franchise, you know?
Mm-hmm.
That movie gets a lot of shit, you know, sewed, Deadpool's mouth shut, of course, is the biggest thing you hear. And I think the way it kinda handled a lot of Weapon X was pretty bad, and of course, Wolverine forgets he gets shot in the head and forgets the entire movie ever happened, so it's almost like the movie doesn't really matter because, you know, he doesn't really remember any of it, you know?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Good call out.
Except
So,
for that amazing first scene, you know? That's
right.
it, that's, like, the only thing holding the movie up.
But that's
Good.
part of the
Good.
storyline of the X-Men franchise, like X-Men 1, he didn't remember his past that well, you know.
That's true, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the flip side, Porfirio, you have this as number,
9.
let's see, number 9, fairly
Yeah,
high
above
up.
Apocalypse.
Um, what's your justification for the higher
I
ranking?
I think for me, like it just there's a little bit more sentimental, nostalgic value to it. It came out in 2009, and there was just a lot going on for me at that time of my life, and this movie just was it was just a really good, like, feel good thing with everything going on for me at school and at home, that I was able to always just come back to this movie and just enjoy it. I wasn't as critical of superhero films as I was back then. I just watched it for how it was, and every time I watch it, of course I can look back and be like, this movie sucks. Like, they screwed up Deadpool and everything, but it just reminded me of like a time when I think things were like hard at home and stuff like that. But this was always like a movie I went to kind of escape and enjoy, for that. But it was also, I remember, yeah, like when I watched this movie, I was like, Deadpool. Like, it was finally cool to see a Deadpool live action thing, when we didn't have as high standards as we do now. Um, Even the whole like sewn the mouth shut thing, I was able to still let that pass and be like obviously I had, like, I did a whole eye roll moment when they showed that scene. I was like, this is so stupid. But I was able to look past it and just like enjoy it, and for I guess like what had already happened.
Right on. Okay. Oh, one fun little X-Men nugget. Um, I think we may have mentioned this before, but the the character William Stryker has been played by a number of actors throughout the years.
Hmm.
Um, and there are two actors who are in the show Succession who have played William Stryker, Danny
Oh, really?
Houston and Brian Cox. So uh, in in a in a perfect world, the MCU William Stryker will be played by someone else on Succession, fulfilling the Stryker trifecta, right? My
Kieran
vote
Culkin.
is Kieran Culkin would be great. Jeremy Strong, who played Kendall Roy, would be a great striker also, I think. So
Jeremy Strong would probably be better than Kieran Culkin.
he'd be great. Yeah. All right. So yeah, like I said, we've been going a little long. Let's move on to comics recommendations. We have some X-Men comics to recommend. Why don't I start here? I had an X-Men comic that I forgot I had. So I reread it. It's the Wolverine and Jubilee series from 2010, written by Catherine Immonen and illustrated by Phil Noto. Pretty cool. Um, One thing very notable about this series, it features Jubilee in her yellow and black costume for the first time. And fun fact, this costume did appear in X-Men 97. So like late in season 1, the X-Men are like transformed into different costumes, many of which are like OG costumes, right? But with Jubilee, it was kind of flipped, where she started the season with her original costume from the comics, but her later costume is this black and yellow costume that was a later costume in the comics, and um, it's this series that it debuted in, Wolverine and Jubilee. And interestingly, Jubilee does not have mutant powers in this series, but rather has vampire powers. She is a vampire. So yes, in Marvel Comics, there was a period of time where Jubilee was not a mutant, but rather a vampire. So if you're immediately turned off by that, maybe you don't want to check out this series. Um, but it does happen here, and it's featured pretty heavily. Like it's the plot does revolve around this whole vampire thing, and she basically is like drinking Wolverine's blood for a while because Wolverine, he has this regenerative ability, so he's got blood to spare. So she drinks his blood to like stay alive, basically. So a pretty interesting read. I do recommend it. Wolverine and Jubilee. How about you, Christian? I think you had a couple picks for us too.
Yeah, I got a couple. I guess first one I read, actually called X-Men First Class. Very different. It's very different from the movie, of course. It's meant to be kind of a throwback to the original lineup of the X-Men from the '60s, um, where they draw Beast without the blue fur, and it's an 8-issue miniseries. It was made in 2006, so actually it was done before the movie. And so, written by Jeff Parker, and it's kind of just like a series of like mostly just one shots that kind of highlight a different villain or like little plot line that they go through, but with a bit of a modern art style and modern writing. The other one that I read is actually an Avengers comic, but it's a pretty cool setup. It's called Avengers Extinction. It's about Cable. He's got 24 hours to live, and he's coming back to the future to defeat the Avengers because it leads to Hope dying in the future, and he has to stop them. And on the back, it mentions it's a big tie-in to AVX.
Right on. Okay. Good recommendations, as always. And yeah, that's funny. You mentioned how uh, that series was called X-Men First Class, but it had nothing to do with the movie they made, right? So another in a long line of Marvel movies that is named after a comic series, but doesn't have a whole lot to do with the series at all, right? It's been done time and again. All right, with that, we can wrap up the episode. This is farewell from Henry, Porfirio, and Christian.